Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to get started. My name is Katie Jacobs from the CIPD, and welcome to our latest webinar in the coronavirus series that the CIPD has been running for the past few weeks. Now, today we're doing something a little bit different, and we're hosting a panel of experts from HMRC who will be giving an update on the various government schemes out there to help employers, but with a particular focus on smaller businesses. So we're lucky enough to have joining us today from HMRC, Gareth Cooper, Head of National Insurance Contributions and NINO Policy, Rebecca Hutton, Communication Lead from the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, and Guy Walton, also from the CJRS policy team, not presenting, but he's here on hand to answer questions. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. As ever, I'm just going to run through the quick housekeeping notifications, which I say every time, so if you attend a lot of these, you're probably getting really bored of them. The session is being recorded. It will be available on demand, and you'll find it on the webinar section of the CIPD website. You'll also be able to access recordings of all of our previous webinars there, as well as sign up for future sessions. And I just want to flag that from tomorrow, we've got a series of webinars about tackling racism in the workplace. So please do look for those on our website. If you want to submit questions during the session, then could I ask you to please use the Q&A tab that you can find at the bottom of the screen. Please don't use the chat box for questions. We've had a few questions in advance, so I'll also try and tackle those. A reminder that for legal advice, CIPD members can call our HR Inform helpline. It's available 24/7, and using that means you get an individual response. And also a reminder that the CIPD Coronavirus Hub is still very much up and running, and we're adding new information to it all the time. And finally, as ever, I'm just going to flag our new wellbeing helpline for members in the UK and Ireland. With award-winning workplace wellbeing provider, Health Assured, we're now providing CIPD members with free help and support via sessions with qualified therapists that can be done online or over the phone. So while we hope you won't need to use it, it is there if you need it. So on to the session today. As we're all aware, the coronavirus has led to the government introducing unprecedented measures of support for businesses, which are aimed at protecting jobs. And these have been administered via HMRC, and our experts are going to take us through two of them today. First up, Gareth is going to explain how the coronavirus statutory sick pay rebate scheme works, and that's where smaller employers can be compensated for SSP costs. And then Rebecca will take us through the extension to the coronavirus job retention scheme, which is now closing on the 31st of October, and flexible furloughing, which kicks off pretty soon, 1st of July. After the presentations, we'll have time to take your questions, but please do get them in throughout the session. And as I said, we've got some in advance, which I'll also try to take. But that's it from me for now. I'm going to hand over to Gareth to kick us off. Thank you, Gareth. And a reminder, you need to unmute yourself.
Afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Tanya. Sorry, wrong name. Afternoon, everyone. My name's Gareth Cooper. I'm the Head of National Insurance Contributions and National Insurance Number Policy, and also the Policy Lead on the Coronavirus Statutory Sick Pay Rebate Scheme. And you can thank me for that mouthful. Next slide, please. So an outline there of what I want to talk to you about. So we've got the agenda. It's the scheme aims. We'll cover off who can claim, what can be claimed, making a claim, and keeping records. With a session at the end, I think, for Q&A. I think Rebecca will follow me immediately after this. I should start by saying, obviously, the statutory sick pay rebate scheme was the government's first scheme that it announced. It was announced at budget this year. I think, however, it was the last to be launched. Much of HMRC's focus understandably shifted towards the much larger and more substantial schemes that were introduced. But we'll talk through this one and then cover off any questions and answers that you've got at the end. Next page, please. And again, next page. So the scheme aims to compensate employers for the cost of statutory sick pay where an employee is unable to work due to coronavirus. And by coronavirus, we have a slightly broader interpretation than being directly affected itself. So either they're displaying symptoms of the virus, or they're incapable of work due to having to self-isolate in accordance with official guidance from the public health authorities from each of the devolved administrations. Or they're shielding following the receipt of a letter from the doctor or the NHS identifying them as being extremely vulnerable. So it aims to compensate employers for sick pay that is paid for those reasons alone, not more generally sick pay. Next slide, please. We'll talk a bit about who can claim. So any employer in the UK can claim, provided they have fewer than 250 employees registered on their PAYE scheme as at the 28th of February. That includes charities employers, and the PAYE scheme must have been created and started on or before the 28th of February. So essentially any employer who was operating PAYE and had less than 250 employees registered on their PAYE scheme is eligible to claim from this scheme where they experienced the cost that we talked about earlier. It should probably be flagged at that basis that there's a couple of caveats that are a bit more detailed and nuanced on that I'll touch on briefly. Firstly, where the employer is an economic undertaking, which will be most employers, but this is a state aid term, they're also required to be eligible to receive state aid under the UK's temporary framework, which was agreed with the European Commission. That won't apply for businesses that are not, or employers that aren't economic undertakings. So that would be things like a community amateur sports club or so on and so forth. Those rules don't apply, but where they do, they must be eligible for the state aid, and full details of that are available on gov.uk. Next page, please. Talk a bit about what can be claimed. So when the Chancellor announced this at budget earlier this year, he was clear that this would help employers with a maximum of 2 weeks statutory sick pay for each employee that an employer had, where they had claimed sick pay because they were unable to work for a reason relating to coronavirus. Employers are able to claim retrospectively for any qualifying days back to the day at which the Department for Work and Pensions, who have the policy responsibility for statutory sick pay, amended their regulation. So that's for most the 13th of March. For those that are shielding, it's from the 16th of April. So that's those that have received a letter telling them that they should shield for a period of, I think it was 12 weeks. The maximum number of employees that can be claimed for is the number registered on the PAYE scheme as at the 28th of February. So you had to have, as an employer, you had to have fewer than 250 employees to be eligible for the scheme. The maximum amount you can claim is determined by 2 weeks of statutory sick pay times the number of employers that individual employer had at the time of the 28th of February. So if they had 100 employees on February's payroll, that would be their maximum number, even if subsequently their headcount increased or decreased. Next slide, please. We've got an outline here of the statutory sick pay rates. So there'll be a small number for whom last year's rate was applicable, which was 94.25. For most, it will be 95.85, which is the rate since the 6th of April 2020. And the funding covers 2 weeks at the applicable rate. So if it was an absence prior to the 6th of April, it would be at last year's rate. Since the 6th of April, it will be at the slightly higher rate. It covers, as we've said several times, or as I've said several times already, it covers 2 weeks statutory sick pay per employee. And that's in line with the recommended isolation period of between 7 and 14 days, depending on the particular circumstances and reasons that someone is isolating. And it's worth noting here that employers are able to claim for more than one period for a single employee, but the combined total of all of the claims for the employee cannot exceed 2 weeks. So someone could claim for 2 1-week periods or shorter periods where that were possible, subject to the individual being entitled to statutory sick pay for that period. And we won't get too much into statutory sick pay policy and eligibility unless people want to ask further questions on that. Next slide, please. So making a claim. So as many of you will probably be aware, the online service launched on the 26th of May. That's a standalone digital service that was built by HMRC, working with some of our suppliers. It works in a similar way to the other major schemes, so similar to the CJRS and CEES schemes. Individuals or employers will need their government gateway user ID and password. If they've not registered, they're able to do so. To do that online, it will need to be the gateway ID that's associated with the payroll they're wanting to claim against. And agents that are authorised to operate PAYE on behalf of an employer are also able to claim on behalf of the employer. The journey is relatively straightforward, and the feedback we've received, particularly on this scheme, is very, very positive. It's fairly straightforward. The PAYE details are entered. It validates that that's the scheme someone's looking to claim against. Asks the employer for how many people they're looking to claim for. Validates that against the number of employees we have registered on that scheme. Asks for the amount that they want to claim. Validates that against the number of employees and that it isn't more than 2 weeks. And then gathers some administration type details. So things like bank details, who to contact about the claim, so on and so forth. Provides confirmation that they've made the claim, that it's been successful, and then also gives the details of the claim reference and the state aid notification that's required under the legislation. Next slide, please. So the final thing that I wanted to cover off before I hand back is just the record keeping requirement that was created as part of the rebate. So there isn't a substantive or significant record keeping requirement that exists for statutory sick pay ordinarily, but the government did make the decision that for the purposes of the rebate, it would ask employers to keep some details of the claims that they have made. So as that slide sets out, it's fairly high level, but it's enough just to validate that an employer's done what they can to satisfy themselves that they were eligible for the rebate. So the first thing is the period of incapacity for work. So essentially the period that the employee was off sick for which a claim for recovery was made. So essentially, when did the employee go off and when did they return? And for what period were you paying sick pay? We're asking employers to keep a record of the reason for incapacity for work provided by the employee. Now, some larger and mid-size employers will have systems that record this under a category letter or similar for them. Others may have paper records, and both of those is fine. But essentially, we're looking to understand whether it was one of the 3 reasons that the rebate is available for. That is coronavirus, self-isolation, or shielding. The number of qualifying days in the period of incapacity. So for those that are familiar with statutory sick pay, it's paid for qualifying days, which are not necessarily work days or weekdays, or indeed every work or weekday. It will be based on the work pattern of the individual employee. And then finally, the national insurance number of the employee that's been claimed, for us to be able to track that through the system in the case that we need to. That's the end of my slides. I can see there's a few Q&As there, but I think we are picking those up at the end. So I'll hand back now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for that, Gareth. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions come in specifically around the SSP rebate scheme, but we'll pick those up after Rebecca has given us an update on the CJRS. Feel free to put in further questions if they come to you during this, but I will mute myself and hand over to Rebecca.
Thanks, Katie, and welcome everybody. As you can see from the slide, my name's Rebecca Hutton and I am the communications lead on the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme project. And prior to this, I worked on Making Tax Digital, so I may have spoken to some of you under that guise. So we're just going to move on to the slides now. What I will say is that the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme has got lots and lots and lots of guidance on gov.uk, and I am just going to be doing a quick whistle-stop tour through some of the main elements of the scheme today. If you do need more in-depth information, please do go to gov.uk, where there is lots of guidance. There's also the ability to sign up to one of our webinars, which goes through the scheme in much more detail than I am going to do today. I have also agreed to circulate after today's session a list of links to the guidance and indeed where you can sign up for one of those webinars. So quickly to go in to talk about the scheme then. So this was a temporary scheme that began on the 1st of March 2020, and it enables employers to furlough employees and get a grant of 80% per month up to a current salary of £2,500. And the scheme is going to continue in its current form until the 30th of June, but then there are changes to the scheme, including increased employer contributions. So all businesses will have to look at the contributions that they will have to make, and that of course will make, in turn, lead them to decisions around furloughing, bringing employees back, etc. Next slide. So, as I say, stays the same up until the 1st of June, and then from the 1st of July, we are talking about flexible furlough. So employers can then, from the 1st of July, they can bring back to work employees that have previously been furloughed, and they can bring them back for any amount of time and for any shift pattern. And what they're able to do is still claim the CJRS grant for the hours that the employees are not working, and the employee would, of course, then pay the wages for the hours that the employee has gone back to work. Next slide. So as it says here, the priority has always been to support people, protect jobs and livelihoods throughout the crisis. And now we've reached the stage that we are looking, obviously, to get the country back to work and try and facilitate that and to help businesses do that as flexibly as possible. So from the 1st of August, the level of the grant will be reduced each month as more employees who are able to work can return to work. And as I said earlier, employers will be asked to contribute towards the cost of furloughed employees' wages on an increasing scale. Next slide. So what's changing? So I think we're going to look at some key dates today, and one of the first key dates we're going to look at is the 30th of June. So from the 30th of June, the scheme will close to new entrants, and that is new employers and new employees. So from the 1st of July, employers will only be able to claim for employees who have been previously furloughed for at least 3 consecutive weeks. So in order to meet that criteria, if they hadn't been furloughed for 3 consecutive weeks before, the last date that you could have furloughed an employee for the first time was actually the 10th of June. So obviously that date has now passed. Next slide. So from the 1st of July, employers can bring furloughed employees back to work on a part-time basis, so for any amount of time and on any shift pattern, while they're still able to claim the grant for the normal hours that haven't been worked. Employers will still be able to claim the furlough grant for the hours employees who aren't flexibly furloughed don't work compared to the hours they would normally have worked for that period. Next slide. So then for June and July, the government will continue to pay 80% of people's salaries up to the $2,500 per month. From the 1st of August, the level of the grant will start to be reduced as people start to return to work, and employers will be asked to contribute to those wages, so the cost of the furloughed employees, and to ensure that they continue to receive at least 80% of their wages. So for example, if the employer contribution is 70%, sorry, if the government contribution is 70%, the employer would then have to top up 10% to ensure that the employee receives at least 80% of their wages while on furlough. Next slide. So the number of employees that you can claim for in any period from the 1st of July cannot exceed the maximum amount of employees you claimed for under any claim ending by the 3rd of June. So on a practical level, that means that if you have put in 3 claims now, one of which you furloughed 10 people, the next one had 20 and the third one had 10, your maximum cap there is that 20, the one in the middle. So any claim put in from the 3rd of July would not be able to be, you would not be able to include more employees on that claim than 20. Next slide. So how do you make a claim under the flexible furloughing? Well, you continue to make it as you do now using the online services on gov.uk. Next slide. So some of you on this call may have furloughed 100 or more employees. So you are currently get to a part of the system where you're asked to upload a template, and the 4 formats are on there, the template. The reason that I've kept this on here today is because actually one thing that we are going to be doing from the 1st of July is providing templates for those file uploads. And if you are a customer that is furloughing 100 or more, you may want to use one of those templates that are available on gov.uk. If you do use one of those templates, you are less unlikely to see HMRC come back and ask you to provide the information in a different format. What we have found is customers are giving us lots and lots of information, and sometimes actually far more than we need, and the provision of these templates is a way to address that so that you are able to see exactly the kind of information that we're looking for and in which format. And those templates are available in the 4 file formats that we've got outlined there as well. Next slide, please. So in addition, if you are flexibly furloughing staff, we're asking you for an extra 2 pieces of information than we were asking you in your initial set of claims. So that's the hours that they've actually worked during the claim period and the usual hours worked in that claim period. If you are looking for more in-depth definitions of what any of these terms mean, please do go to gov.uk. Next slide. So claims for any days before the 1st of July. So any claims for any days before the 1st of July must end on or before the 30th of June. So this is the case even where an employee furloughed in June continues to be furloughed into July. We are looking to have a kind of a hard deadline at the end of one set of rules to the next set of rules. So we're not looking for claims that span the old rules and the new rules. Next slide, please. So we have released a new calculator. So JRS2, or the flexible furlough portion of JRS, went online on the 12th of this month. And at the same time, we released a new version of our calculator, and the calculator can be used to work out for what you claim. There are some complex circumstances where the calculator is not suitable. And I think the next slide shows some of those exemptions. If we could go on to that. Yeah, it does. So if you are in any of these exception categories, or you have employees in any of these exception categories, then unfortunately the calculator does not reflect those scenarios. So you would have to go to the more traditional guidance and quantify your claim that way. Next slide. So after you've claimed, this is very similar to the slide there that I think Gareth showed, and what you have to do after you've claimed, and that is really keep some records. I would advise people to take a screenshot of the last screen because it's got your claim reference number on. I think it's always useful to keep that. From a governance compliance perspective, keep your calculations in case HMRC need more information about that claim. Keep information for employees you flexibly furloughed. So anything that is underlying to the claim that you have put into the system, I would say keep that information for 6 years so that if we come along and ask you any questions about it, you have it all there ready for us. Next slide. So you must also tell your employers that you've made a claim on their behalf and that they don't need to take any action. And of course, pay that money over to your employees if you haven't done so already. So some customers will make claims in advance and some in arrears. So, you know, you do have to use that money for the purpose it was intended, which is paying those wages to the staff. Next slide. So you must pay the full amount you are claiming to your employee with the usual PAYE deductions. A eligibility criteria of the grant does say that when you claim this grant, you do also agree to pay that money to your employees, and that actually you agree to pay over the PAYE and the NICs back to HMRC. And the same, as I say there, the same applies in relation to employer NICs and pension contribution you claim regarding your employee. Next slide. So what's changing? So in June and July, the government will pay 80% of the wages up to a cap of £2,500, and the government will continue to pay the national insurance and pension contributions. So employers are not required to pay anything at that stage. So really it's a bit of an as-is state up until the end of July. Next slide. So what I've got here is some key dates, and you may have seen these visuals around before. They're the ones that we use in our social media as well. So from the 1st of August, employers will now have to contribute the national insurance contributions and pension for those furloughed employees. So the government will still pay 80% of the wages, but at this point an employer will have to make some contribution of their own. And for August, that is the national insurance and the pension contributions. Next slide. So from the 1st of September, employers will be asked to pay, on top of the national insurance and pension contributions, 10% of the wages. So at that point, the government will pay 10%. Employers have to top up for 10% to 80% to be able to claim the 70%, and also the national insurance and pension contributions. Next slide. And then finally, from the 1st of October, that employer contribution increases again to 20%. So that's 20% plus the wages, 20% of the wages plus the national insurance and pension contribution. And HMRC or the government will pay 60%. So that brings it back again up to 80% for the employee. Next slide. And then 31st of October, the scheme closes. So the end of the scheme. So the job retention scheme is intended to close on the 31st of October. And it says here that we will give you an extra month to make sure that you get all those claims in, so to true up at the end of the claims. I am going to go back and check that that is definitely accurate, because I haven't seen that anywhere else. So I'm going to have a look and I will clarify to attendees on this call after the fact. I mean, of course, when we close the scheme, we will give whatever period of time we have for customers to get their claims in. We will make sure that we notify you of that well in advance, so that employers and businesses have got plenty of time to get those claims in. Next slide. So tax treatment of the Coronavirus Job Retention Grant. I think this might be my final slide. So payments received under CJRS must be included as income of the business calculation of its taxable profits for income tax and corporation tax purposes in accordance with normal principles. So of course, how you return that money and when you return that money is going to depend on whether you are incorporated or not. And I think that that might be my last slide. It was indeed. All right, brilliant. Thank you. So I'm sure that you've all got lots and lots of questions, and I'm lucky that I've got Guy Walton on with me today from our policy team to help me answer some of those. But I'm just going to pass back to Katie now.
Thank you very much for that overview, Rebecca. And just a reminder that that was obviously a whistle-stop tour, as Rebecca said. So if you do want to hear any of that or read any of that in more detail, then we will circulate or somehow get online the document that Rebecca suggested. So we'll move to questions. We've got some questions in advance, we've got some that have been submitted. People are being a little bit shy, so please put in some more, because I will also I'll pull in some that came in our last furlough webinar as well, because I've got those up as well, so I'm sure people have similar questions. I'm going to go to some of the ones that were submitted in advance first. So one for you, Rebecca, or for Guy. I have been advised by our legal advisor that if we bring an employee back from furlough to full-time working, we are unable at a later time to move them to flexible furlough. Could you confirm if that's correct?
So that's incorrect. So as the rule is that they must have been furloughed for 3 weeks before the 30th of June. Now that could have been at the beginning of the furlough period, and they've been brought back to work full time. So it really is that they must have been furloughed for 3 weeks before the 30th of June. So in the situation that you've just described, Katie, they would still be able to put that person back on furlough if they needed to after bringing them back full time.
Sounds like they need perhaps a new legal advisor. We had quite a lot of questions on the last furlough webinar that we did around the minimum, whether there was any kind of minimum time for furloughing people flexibly, or whether you could kind of cycle people between being flexible and full time. And perhaps you could just, Guy or Rebecca, give a little bit more insight into that.
So I think I can take that one, and really there is no minimum furlough period going forward. So you have to have the 3 weeks before the 30th of June. But after that, the thought around this is really around giving employers as much room to do what they need to do to get their business back up and running. So that might be bringing somebody back 2 days, 1 week, full time the week after that, not having them in at all the week after that. Some employers may need to try a few things with regards to getting people back to work before they get to a state that works for them. So no, it is all about flexibility in that last stages.
Thank you. Another question that was submitted in advance. It had previously been communicated that with the new changes, grant claims would have to be processed in the month the work was done. Is that still the case?
They don't have to be processed within the month that the work is done. I personally would advise, I think it's easier for customers to do it that way. What we're saying is that we don't want claims that go over the monthly boundaries. So we would like all of June's claims to be within a claim period relating to June, the same with August, the same with September.
Thank you. One for you, Gareth. Your point that claims can be made for up to two weeks per employee, is that for each employee, for all employees together, or for all employees together, i.e. could one person receive more than 2 weeks if another person didn't claim?
So no, the employer is only eligible to claim 2 weeks in respect of each employee. So you can't say, well, I've got 100 employees, but only 50 of them are off, so they can each have 4 weeks sick pay. It's 2 weeks per employee that an employer can claim the help with the costs for.
Thank you. And another one I'll quickly put to you on SSP as well. My PAYE agent was going to charge us a per person fee to do the SSP claim for us. Is that allowed?
That's a contractual arrangement between unfortunately, you and your PAYE agent, I'd suggest that the service is quite straightforward, and you could look at doing it yourself, but that's obviously your choice.
Brilliant, thank you. Another one that came in advance. It's about notice pay and redundancies, so I'll kind of summarise it. So somebody's questioning the fact that some companies are now making redundancies, having furloughed people, are going to be paying staff notice using furlough money. Is that something that HMRC is looking at? Because according to this question, the taxpayer shouldn't be funding notice pay for employers. So Guy, Rebecca, any kind of views on that?
Yeah, so I would say that if, we are very clear about the purposes of this grant, and it is to be paid over in wages. We will, of course, do our normal compliance activity, but what we also have is a fraud reporting tool online where anybody can let us know if they feel that this system is being abused. So I would say that if you are aware of instances where businesses are abusing the scheme, and there's lots of ways businesses can do that, such as having people working while they're technically furloughed, not flexibly, of course, because now we can do that. I would say please do go and use that tool.
Thank you. Somebody's asked, hello, please can I clarify? We've made a claim up to the 23rd of June for 2 people. Should the claim after that date, from the 24th of June onwards, be made before the 30th of June?
So it doesn't have to be made before the 30th of June, but it does have to run up to the 30th of June. So they have to get up to that end of the month. They wouldn't be able to have it run from that date a month in the future.
The deadline for that claim would be the 31st of July.
Thanks, Guy.
Brilliant, thank you. We've had a question about claiming furlough staff on holiday, and this was something that has come up so many times during all the kind of various furlough webinars we've run about topping people up and holiday pay. This specific question reads, can you still claim furlough for staff on holiday as long as you make up their salary to 100%? So has anything around holiday changed?
So I think I'm going to let you take that one, Guy.
So no holiday can be taken during a period of furlough, and as long as you are paying them their holiday pay, which is topped up to 100% of their usual pay, that is fine, and I don't think it makes any difference where they are in the world as to whether they can remain on furlough or not. Thank
you. How does it work if you flexibly furlough someone and then no work is available the following week? So I think we covered this earlier, but just to reiterate, can you part-time furlough one week and then 100% furlough the next and keep mixing it up?
You certainly can, and that is one reason why you would probably want to wait till the end of the pay period to make any claim. You do need to know the exact number of worked hours during your claim period before you put your claim in. So that's reason enough to if you aren't certain about the number of worked hours during a claim period, to wait till the end of that claim period so you have complete certainty over those numbers.
And something that came up on the webinar we did last week on furlough was, have you got any advice on how you should record that, or will you be asking for records of time worked if people are kind of flexing their hours up and down?
So there is already an obligation for an employer for an employee who works variable hours to know the hours that they are working and to report those on their pay statement, on their pay slip. So there is nothing extra that needs to be recorded, but under the job retention scheme, you do need to retain that information for up to 6 years in case of sort of future inquiry into your numbers.
Question here, what happens if an employee is having a knee operation, or I would assume that would be any operation during furlough? Would this be furlough, or would it revert to sick pay? So I guess actually it's a question anybody can answer.
So an employee can only receive either statutory sick pay or wages under the job retention scheme. So if an employee is sick, on sick leave during a period of furlough, they can receive either, but they can't receive both. So the employer needs to make a decision as to whether they are remaining furloughed during that period or whether they are coming off furlough and onto statutory sick pay. And there is a very obvious sort of decision there. It would be sensible for that person to remain on furlough if they already are on furlough, and continue their grant claim rather than reverting to statutory sick pay. But no, the sort of the policy line is that you're either receiving one or the other.
Thank you. Can you clarify regarding scaling down of claims? So if no one is furloughed in July, but 10 were furloughed in June, could we still furlough in August, but only up to 10?
So your maximum cap for the number of employees that you can claim under CJRS2, so that's the scheme after the 1st of July, will be taken from any claims in respective periods up to the 30th of June. So if you have claimed for 10 employees for any of your claim periods from the 1st of March to the 30th of June, that number 10 employees will be what gets carried forward into CJRS2. So that's the maximum you'll be able to use for July, August, September and October.
Katie, it's Rebecca. I've noticed that Ruth has had a follow-up in the question and answer, because my answer wasn't a yes or a no, I just wanted to say that that's purposeful, because there are some circumstances where that would be allowable and some circumstances where it wouldn't. So the rules on statutory pay and notice periods are pretty complex, but there is a section on that on gov.uk around what is and isn't allowable. So as I say, it's not a yes or a no answer.
Thank you. If we can't afford to wait to submit claim after the hours worked, can we deduct it from the next claim if overclaimed? That's probably a question for Guy.
Could you repeat that one?
So if they're saying if we can't afford to wait to submit the claim after the hours worked, can we deduct it from the next claim if we happen to have overclaimed?
So if you find out that you've overclaimed and you owe HMRC money back, then yes, you can make that adjustment on a future claim.
But I wouldn't encourage people to necessarily do that, on purpose. So if your claim when you submit it should be as robust as possible. I wouldn't want people to be overinflating claims and thinking that they can just for cash flow purposes and then reduce the next one accordingly. So that amendment facility that you can use within the service is for genuine errors.
Thank you. Do we need to write to each employee who will be going into the flexible scheme? I have read you absolutely should, as it is a change to their contract. This question applies to both salaried and hourly staff, please.
So that depends on what your current agreement with them is. If they are already fully furloughed and they're remaining fully furloughed for the foreseeable future, then nothing is changing in their terms and conditions, and therefore you wouldn't need to update your correspondence with them. But if you are changing something, either they've come back to working and you're deciding to flexibly furlough them, or they're going from fully furloughed to flexible furlough, you would need and the scheme requires you to have an updated agreement with your employee.
Yeah. If on the contract is 100% sick pay and whilst on furlough you become sick, do you have to top up to 100% as per the contract, or would you follow furlough only? That's a bit confusingly phrased.
So could you just repeat that? Is that enhanced sick pay to 100%?
Yeah, I think that's what it means. If you're enhancing sick pay to 100% and then on furlough somebody becomes sick, do you have to top it up to 100%?
I think, Guy, it comes back to your earlier answer, which is for the purposes of both scheme, you are either sick or you are furloughed. So if someone is sick, then the furlough grant is no longer claimable if that is the choice that the employer has made, that someone's gone off sick. So they'd be able to potentially claim the statutory sick pay rebate. They would have to pay up any top up to the occupational scheme themselves, or in that scenario, the employer could choose that they continue to be furloughed.
Thank you. That's great. I'm going to just take a couple that came up in the other one that we did the other week. So we've had quite a few around usual hours. If you've got people that tend to work discretionary overtime, and what usual hours counts at. So if you normally, so for the example they gave is if last July somebody normally would work 39 hours and then they did 10 hours overtime, what is usual hours?
So that's one that I think, Katie, is not an easy one just to give a straightforward answer on this call, because there are lots and lots of different scenarios that I'm sure people would have in mind. So I would suggest for those type of questions, go and have a look at the guidance on gov.uk or the CJRS extension webinars that went live this week. My session was just a very small snapshot. There is a complete section on usual hours within that webinar that goes through some of the more common examples. So I would suggest go and have a look at the guidance on that.
Another thing that is coming up a few times in conversations or questions that we're having around this topic is what counts as working. So if people are furloughed, can you go through the redundancy consultation? Another specific one we had was if people are furloughed, can you involve them in discussions about making the workplace safer? So I think take the redundancy one first. Can you do consultation while people are on furlough?
Sorry, my dog's decided that this is the time he wants to have a bark. That was me, I apologise.
Okay, it's a new normal. Guy, can you answer that one?
I can go away and check that one. I would have thought that because you are not providing a service or profiting the business from your actions in a redundancy consultation, that would not sort of jeopardise your furlough period. But on your second example, if you are partaking in discussions about making the workplace safe for a returning worker, that is for the benefit of your employer. But I would have to go away and check the redundancy consultation point as to whether that constitutes work for this scheme.
I think that will be something that a lot of employers will be thinking about, and I think most people will be assuming that it does not constitute work. What will happen if a shielding employee on furlough chooses to go back to work on the 1st of July instead of waiting for the government guideline the 1st of August? Can you keep that person on furlough until October? I mean, generally, we had quite a lot of questions in previous sessions about people who are shielding, and some people wanting to get back to work and their employer not wanting them to, or vice versa.
I think that's sort of beyond our sort of scheme. So someone who should be under government guidelines staying at home, who is choosing to ignore that and return to work, I think that's more of a sort of a HR issue between employer and employee. There would be nothing to stop them claiming under the scheme if they remain furloughed, and you wouldn't be able to claim under the scheme if they returned to work and work full time. But as to whether they should be coming back to work when the guideline is that they stay at home is not really a HMRC issue, I don't think.
Can I please clarify the point about paying employees 100% for the hours they work while on flexi furlough? Does it have to be paid at 100%, or can this be subject to another agreement with the employee? All our staff who are currently working are working 90% hours at 90% wages. So for example, if we brought somebody back on flexi furlough for 3 weeks, could we also agree with that employee that they would only work 90% of the hours for those weeks and therefore be paid at 90% as well? So it's quite a long question.
Absolutely, you are free to agree whatever payment and hours with your employees as you wish. So if the concept of topping up someone from 80% to 100 is completely voluntary for the employer. They can top up all the way to 100, or they can top up to 90. It is just that they must receive the 80% if their employer is claiming that 80% from HMRC.
Okay. And Rebecca, you might have seen that someone is again asking for some clarification on using the furlough grant to pay for part of somebody's notice period when they're being made redundant. Apparently ACAS have given advice saying it can be.
So what I have done in the meantime, because I did see that come up again, is I have pulled the exact part of the guidance that talks about this. So what it says at the moment is pay during the redundancy notice period is based on the individual's rights under their contract of employment and the statutory right to notice pay. And then it gives the legislative reference to that. The rules on statutory notice pay are complex and depend on whether the employer is required to give only statutory notice or at least a week or more than statutory notice, and whether the employer has normal working hours or not. For any period of notice which exceeds the minimum salary requirements, the terms of the contract of the employment would need to be considered. This complexity does mean that there may be some situations where the employer would be legally permitted to use the furlough grant during the notice period. However, in these difficult times, we would not expect an employer to take advantage of CJRS, which has brought benefit to employers and employees alike, to make someone redundant on less favourable terms than they would otherwise have received. So I'm afraid it's still not a yes or no answer, but that is what we have in the guidance.
Thank you. And then, okay, so we've got one final question here, which I believe we've already answered, because yes, the answer is, even I can answer this now, if we are taking an employee back from July with flexible furlough, you can then put them back in and we can mix up the mix of hours. I'm gonna just ask one final question that came in advance, and then we'll wrap up. So if anybody is sitting there thinking, oh, I wish I'd asked it, then this is your last couple of minutes to put that question in. And I appreciate, because we discussed this before we went live, that this is something that you may not be able to answer, but I'm going to ask it because it is a great question. So the CJRS has been an innovative protection mechanism for UK jobs. The downside will be many jobs are now being protected that will undoubtedly be lost. Could you turn the same levels of innovation to the creation of new jobs that are born today, facing today's COVID-19 reality, with a much greater likelihood of sustainably building our futures? That question's from John. So any thoughts on that, appreciating that it is probably not your area?
So yeah, I think, thanks John, brilliant question. You know, my thoughts of that are HMRC can turn its hand to whatever HMRC is asked to turn its hand to. We've delivered, you know, JRS at breakneck speed in a different way than we normally would, and we would always be able to respond to any ask that comes from the Chancellor or Treasury on this. But of course we are a government department and we serve the government of the day, and your question feels like more of a question for our politicians than it does for our civil servants.
Thank you, that's a brilliant answer, but we'll all be kind of watching the news and seeing what is going to come, announcements in the next few weeks. So Ruth has just put in another comment, Rebecca, which I'll just read in case you want to address it.
So what I was going to say on this one is that what I'm more than happy, because Ruth, it sounds like a very specific set of circumstances. So if Ruth wants to write down what the circumstances are, I'm more than happy to have a look at it at our end and provide an answer.
Okay, that's really kind of you. Just for people watching, because I don't know if you can all see the Q&A, but this is about contractual obligations and notice period furlough pay, and needing further guidance on that. And she makes the point, which is entirely true, that no employer wants to break the law, so it's the guidance, further guidance that's required. Thank you. I'm gonna wrap it up there, because I think we've answered all of the questions that have come in, and thank you for those questions, and thank you all for answering them, because I believe some of them were quite tough, so really appreciate that. Thank you very much, Gareth, Rebecca, Guy, for joining us this afternoon, and thanks everybody for watching. A reminder that the webinar and the slides will be available on demand, and we will wait until Rebecca's just clarified that one point she mentioned to make sure that we're putting up slides that have accurate information on them. We'll also be able to share the document that Rebecca mentioned, that is a signpost to all the different information on the CJRS that you'll be able to read or sign up for future webinars. A reminder that you can sign up for all of the CIPD's future webinars on the CIPD website. A reminder that from tomorrow we've got a series starting on tackling racism in the workplace. That's going to be a series of free webinars that are going to take place over a week. So really would encourage you to have a look for that on the website and do sign up. It's such an important topic. And a final reminder about our new wellbeing helpline that's available for members in the UK and Ireland. And I think I've got too many things open, but hopefully you can see, yes, you can see that on your screen right now. But that's it from us this afternoon. Thank you all for watching, and we will see you on a future session. Goodbye for now.